Hey, everybody, welcome back to the Can I Ask You a Question podcast. Have you ever asked yourself this question? Why am I the way that I am? Probably you maybe asked it in a moment of difficulty, of failure, or maybe you got some negative feedback. When we don't know who we are, we really can't know how to live and best use the giftings and the designs that God built in us to be useful, to be joyful, and successful. And that's one reason that I am so excited to announce today's guest. That is Raquel. Raquel is a personal friend of Ali and I. Raquel, see if I get this right. She's the head of ministry and young adults pastor at City Life in Life Church at Knox.
Yeah, that's right.
It's a suburb of Melbourne, Australia.
You did so well.
The internet didn't lie to me. That's good.
That's right. That's good.
Raquel's a trained Enneagram coach. And the Enneagram is a personality framework and assessment that, a lot of people, I think, heard about it around 2020. It was around a lot before that. We're going to dive all into that, and it helps us better understand ourselves, understand those around us. And yeah, just excited to be with my friend Raquel, draw on her wisdom, and hopefully learn and have good conversations. Raquel, good to be with you here.
Yeah, this is awesome, Geno. I'm so excited to be chatting with you today. It's been great.
Yeah. So the first thing I wanted to talk about was how weird the time difference is.
Yeah, we're in the future right now.
You're speaking to me because I right now, and we actually got our time slightly wrong, you and I. So it's 7 p.m. here.
Oh, okay.
So
yeah,
I'm
we've just had an hour change in our
just
daylight
shifted.
savings.
Okay.
Mhm.
So I'm like I've had my whole day. I'm in the evening, and you're just like right in the afternoon. Like if you'd been really, really tired, you might have only woken up a little while ago. Not that you maybe do that, but
no. Yeah, no, I've been awake for a while, but yes, that's right. It's 12 p.m. So it's like lunchtime soon for me.
lunch. So it's 7 p.m. Friday evening for me, and it's
Saturday lunch.
I actually do find that just weird psychologically. When you lived in the States,
Yeah.
was how was that interacting with friends and family that you need to stay connected with when you're always behind or ahead of them?
Yeah, the maths was crazy. I was just glad to have had my iPhone who could tell me what was going on when in what time of the country. And FaceTime was so helpful. I wouldn't have been able to do that without it. So yeah, I think that psychologically it's weird being in another country and someone else is living a completely different life separate from me. I think that was the weirdest thing. The time difference, we got over that pretty quick. We got into our rhythm.
It's just the physical difference
I think so,
of
yeah.
distance.
Distance for sure. Yeah. And that
Whereas
the
like,
toilet like flushes the opposite way.
is
So
that
in
true?
America, the gravity, it must be something different.
That's weird.
It was strange.
For me, when I'll just do like international trips, it is weird though for me that the time change is weird. Like the idea that when I try to connect with Ali, with my spouse, and I'm like, I'm tired, my day is done. When I was just in Cambodia, it'd be similar time difference. And you're just wanting to talk. She's just wanting to talk because she's just starting her day.
Bit more energy. So you're winding down and I'm just raring to go.
Yeah. So it's
That's
a little different, but I'm glad to connect. Okay.
Yeah.
On that kind of a topic, what is one cultural difference you noticed when you were living in the States for a season doing school and serving at church versus Australia? It could be a funny one, or it could be kind of a more serious one.
Yeah. I would say culturally, just in Australia, when we go to university, when we go to our college, everyone stays in their local town. So we don't cross over states. We stay where we are. But I found when I went to America, everyone was just from lots of different states coming in. So that was very different. We also don't live on campus. We live at home with our families often. So people live at home in Australia till probably like sometimes till they're 30. It's either like failure to launch or we are just smart savers for our home loans one day. We're not sure which way.
Probably that one.
Yeah, we'll go with that. But yeah, very different. So everyone moves out of home. So living on campus was like really a different experience in dormitory and eating food on the campus, getting your food. Freshman 15 was a real thing when I was there. So plenty of differences, I think. Also football, I couldn't believe it being at the U of O, just the Ducks, how many people I'd come off the plane. Everyone was wearing green and yellow. Couldn't believe that. It's very different over here. We're not as
Yeah.
fanatic. Yeah.
So what was the school? I actually don't remember. What was the school you went to in Australia? Because I think that's where you started, right? And then you were just in U of O for a
Yeah,
season.
that's right. I was studying my business and sports management at Deakin University, so just in my local area. And yeah, there was a transfer, an exchange that happened for a year that allowed me to come over. It was the best decision I made. Wouldn't have met you guys. So yeah, it was awesome. Eugene became second home. So
Oh, it's so cool.
mm.
Um, and so it's not common to do dormitories. Are there some colleges or universities in Australia where they do, or is it almost always you stay in your
Some
local
people
area?
from the country tend to, if they're out in rural areas, they will come and live, or a lot of international students. So probably Melbourne's very diverse. It's like a melting pot of culture over here. So even in my high school, we would have many, many different nationalities. So it's kind of like actually more like Vancouver, Canada. When I went to Vancouver, I was like, oh, this feels like home. It's just very multicultural.
Oh, very cool.
Mm,
Well, we'll keep going, but for everyone on the
yeah.
podcast, we all get to enjoy a different than an American accent, Dan. I'm loving it. I'm loving those
I forget that.
Commonwealth, or Australia is a Commonwealth, right? So like
Yeah.
England, Ireland, Australia, I love it. Getting some bluey vibes while we're talking.
Bluey. Yeah, that's right.
We have a two-year old now, so we're enjoying bluey, Ellie and I.
I'm sure. That's a good
Um,
one.
Okay, so imagine we have 90 seconds on an elevator, and you're going to tell us a little
Mm.
bit of your story in a synopsis. We're jumping right in now. We're getting
All
serious.
right, let's do it.
Where are you now? What are you doing? And where did it
Mhm.
start? A little bit of the journey. And if you go longer than 90 seconds, that's okay.
Oh, really? I was expecting the hard
Then
chop.
nope, we will mute
Okay.
whatever else you say.
All right, great. Well, I've been a pastor for the last 9 years. So I've been started in youth ministry for 7, and the last 2 years I've been doing young adults ministry, which has been awesome. But throughout that process, it was a bit of a shift from my business management and sports management. I always felt called to ministry, but I wanted to like get a secular degree and get some life experience before heading into that. So jumped in, started ministry, and was like, all right, it's time to equip myself in some ministry training. So did my master's of divinity actually part-time for the last 9 years as well. So that has been a huge journey. It was like a decade of my life. I'm thinking this is going to be a big one.
Yeah.
Just finished that in the last 6 months, and I finished my thesis where I actually got to marry my two loves of the Enneagram and theology together in that thesis. So along that journey of the last decade, I've been doing many studies overseas in New York and Singapore and online for the Enneagram, and got to integrate both of those into a final capstone in my studies. So that's where I'm at the moment. Um, yeah. How did I go?
And how did you? That was great. That was within the time. And how do we get there? What's the little bit of the origin story of Raquel?
Mm. Yeah, I think for me, I taking some steps back, I really felt a sense of what's my purpose in life. I think in high school that was a question where I felt God really just say, you want to steer your life in one direction, and it was going to be down the business and sports management direction. And I realized, no, I was taking the reins the way I wanted it to, and He really steered me in a different way. And it was just, I found a lot of pieces. I didn't know what those pieces were going to add up to at the time. But now I can see like the sum of all of these small experiences and steps that I took, just blindly taking them, have actually merged together for what God had actually wanted to prepare me for. And so, yeah, I don't see my business and sports management as a waste. I feel like that taught me skills of leadership and management and organization, which are so important in pastoral ministry. And I think part of the passion, though, for doing ministry as opposed to being in the secular sphere in this season was I think when the church comes alive and knows their giftings and knows who they are going to be well positioned. I'm just really passionate about people finding their place. And so that was part of my journey of finding my place and where do I fit and where's the divine intersection of my gifts, my experiences, my passions meet up and align. And this is how we got there. I didn't grow up in a Christian family, so to speak. My dad came to faith when I was a child, and my mom came to faith actually when I was an adult. So it was definitely a journey of coming into realizing who God was. And when I realized the fullness of that, that was like, wow, I want to give my life to this.
Man, that's so interesting. And obviously it's very thematic because we're going to be talking today about self-awareness and the Enneagram and understanding yourself. And I think, and we're not going to jump into there quite yet, but when we do, what I've found, at least with the Enneagram, is it explains a lot of your past. It gives you, like, you can, and I want to hear your thoughts on that in a little bit, I guess, but I find something like, oh, okay, now knowing this about myself, I can understand why I needed to go through that or why I did that, or, so it's interesting to hear your story there.
Absolutely.
A follow-up question when you were talking, because I was curious about that, kind of how you came to faith. How would you, because I would always grew up in a Christian environment, I don't have the experience of living a pretty large part of my life outside of Christ and Christianity. How was that different? What like on on an internal level, like maybe on a well-being level, how you felt inside, how you saw the world, hope? Was there, I know the most politically correct answer is that everything got better, everything shifted, the moment you were saved, but maybe it was more subtle. Maybe it actually got harder because now you had a new awareness. What was that like for you?
Yeah, it was an interesting situation for me because my parents actually weren't together. So one of them had faith, one of them didn't, and I lived in two different households. So the biggest contradiction was like, who am I in this space? Who am I in that space? And obviously you get your identity in relationships as well. You form who you are. And so I would be in one house forming, wait, I'm like this in this way. I'm like this when I'm here. Who am I? And I had to really reorientate around not pleasing one or the other, one of my parents, but pleasing God first. And I actually, in a strange way, had an innate faith from a pretty young age. I remember being around the table with my my extended family who were not Christian on my mum's side, and them just firing questions at me about faith and science and evolution and all these like apologetic questions, which I was like 5, 6 years old, and I said, I don't know or have all the answers now, but one day I'll find out and I'll come back to you. And I just had a sense, I'm like, no, I know God is real. And I was around like 40-year-olds as a 5-year-old, like defending this innate sense of who I knew God was at a young age. And that has actually formed a lot of my journey of even apologetics has been a stream of learning that I've really delved into because I've had that desire to be able to articulate to the people I loved why this is actually so amazing and who God is. So that formed. It was forming in my faith was forming in an environment that was competing against it. If that was, which was healthy, I found.
It's interesting. That's very cool too. That's quite beautiful. As a 5 or 6-year-old, I don't have the answers yet, but I'll be back.
I'll be back. That's it.
In a non-threatening way, but it's pretty amazing actually.
Yeah.
But so you actually did come to faith early. It just wasn't both parents, and you're growing up in that divided two different households.
That's right. Yeah, my school was a Christian school that my dad was working at, so it was kind of all brand new faith for him. He was fully immersed in it. I had that side of things going on, and was great values and learnings at the school. And so I did have a learning. It wasn't just dropped from heaven, but it was real to me. It wasn't just because someone had told me. Now I've watched now as a lot of my friends who completed high school have actually left faith. And in some ways it's a challenge now to go, how in situations when people grow up in non-competing environments
Yeah.
against their faith, how they can settle into that complacency and not actively seeking it. But I had to actively seek it to get it, and to fight for it in those young teenage years, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Um,
And you were saying, I think if I heard you right, that you actually credit that to some of the strength of your faith in the end was that friction and challenge.
yeah, actually. So it was healthy, I found, to be in some environments that were competing against, that I had to give a reason for, I had to actually stand up against, and it wasn't just easy. And that's why they say first generation Christians are sometimes the strongest. It's the children of the first generation or the third generation that they don't know what they've fought for from the generations before. So yeah, I I imagine myself going and finding, when one day when I have a family, is finding places and avenues, whether it's in sporting realms or in different places where people actually come up against some challenge against their faith, which is healthy. I think it actually um, forms some resilience.
That's really good. And at looking, I'm a second, really third generation Christian, but I guess in many ways because we didn't live around our family a whole lot growing up, grandparents and stuff off and on. I'm a second generation Christian, my parents were pastors for my whole life. And all of us kids are in ministry, loving Jesus. And sometimes I wonder, okay, but a lot of pastors' kids aren't. A lot of, like you're saying, a lot of times they do exactly what you said. They're taking it for granted because it wasn't their faith. They didn't have this really clear salvation story, whatever. And when I think back in our story, it was the persecution of just natural leadership that the leaders faced of my parents, all these people hating on the leader that I think galvanized all of us kids. Sometimes actually it probably didn't push us to Jesus, and it should have, but it definitely pushed us towards morality, Christianity. We weren't going to become like the people that were trying to break up the church, trying to, doing very obviously immoral things. It was like they were always coming attacking our parents. And I think it probably gave all of us kids a fight that maybe if we had been shielded from that or never had that, we might have. I wonder if that's how we got hopefully a similar grit to a similar,
Yes.
eagerness of faith. And now I'm raising a daughter, and we see third or fourth generation Christians, so I'll have to figure that out. Like, okay, how does this stay fresh? How does this stay front lines for her? So that's really interesting what you're saying.
And I think going through youth ministry, recognizing that that's a real stage of faith formation, it's really essential. So for in ministry, like creating spaces for doubts and questions to happen as they're kind of like in the year 7 and 8 kind of time, they're looking for belonging, so they'll just attach themselves to their friendship group, whatnot. But then they try to individualize and like separate themselves. Year 9, year 10, they try to find out who they are and separate. They often have a lot of friendship issues at that point. And then year 11 and 12, they're like trying to steward their freedom. And so a lot of this is done outside of the parents. This is a lot of friendships, a lot of who's in their world. And so I think in the role of youth ministry or the role of mentors or people outside of the family in that stage of faith formation, being a safe place to deconstruct and reconstruct healthily, because they're pulling out all of the things that their parents have packed for them in their backpack. Like as they've gone from primary school, they've got all of the tools the parents have given them, but in high school, they're like, no, they're questioning it all. And we as like, people who are stewarding healthy faith formation, we need to let them like look at all the items, be like, is this really true? Do I actually agree, discard, or do I keep this one? And then it becomes an ownership. They've created and participated in that faith.
That's good.
So yeah, that's definitely being active in part of forming healthy doubt and stages of formation in those young ages as well.
And you led in youth ministry for quite a while, right? Now you're in young adult.
7 years.
7 years in that. For us, that'd be junior high to high school, or grade 6 or 7 through 12.
That's right.
Okay,
sorry, that's
so that
a
was
completely different language I just used for anyone that was listening.
first I was like 7-year-olds, 8-year-olds, and I was year 7, year 8.
Year 7, year 8. Yeah, that's right. Junior high, middle school, and then
And yeah, I think that's so good. So my story is kind of probably not the norm in that, okay, pastor's kid, other people's challenges probably forced us to pull the things our parents had put in our backpack and to own our truth because we had to defend it against, outside attackers.
Yes.
But the average person isn't their parent is not a pastor. The parents aren't being attacked. Their faith isn't being attacked in that way. So if I'm
Mhm.
hearing you, so they're gonna actually maybe they're gonna be the source of their own attack sometimes. They're gonna be the one pulling it
Mhm.
out of the backpack, asking the
Mhm.
questions, maybe in response
Yeah.
to something they saw on social media or a friend. And then
Yes.
you're saying we need youth leaders, we need people. And if you're a parent, you got to put them with these youth leaders and people who can
Mm.
safely walk them through that journey.
Yeah, I think as parents, the best thing, and I'm not a parent yet, but I just watched as
You
people
just parented
in the
lots and lots
ministry,
of people.
and that's it in a different way.
Yeah.
Um, I think the best witness for parents is to actually live the Christian life to its fullness.
Yeah.
I think if we are sold out and actually putting that center in front, then that's going to be the best witness. But then also positioning people outside of their realm to be inputting into them, like youth ministry and mentors, sport, all that stuff is really healthy for that resistance and also for that faith formation to happen.
Oh man, so good. Well, we're
Mm.
gonna we're gonna jump into kind of what I think will be our core area of conversation. And
Mm.
it's around the Enneagram and you can correct me if I think of it as a tool for self-awareness. Would that be a
Mm-hmm.
fair way of saying it?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's great.
So we're going to talk about. I want to learn from you, and for all of us audience, want to learn from you about the Enneagram a little bit, how to use it in some different ways, and then I think hopefully just in general have a conversation about self-awareness and kind of
Mm.
in different ways. If we get to it, I want to kind of hear
Mm.
your thoughts on this idea of self-awareness and basically the providence of God. I have a thought on that.
Mm.
Um,
Mm.
and hopefully we can get to it. But I was just thinking about just today that I think certain things had to happen in my life, providence of God, because of
Mm.
who's making me. And
Yeah.
so if we get there, I'd like to talk about that.
Yeah,
But
cool. Yeah, we
yeah,
can.
but we'll
Let's
just
do that.
jump in, and I guess the first one is how has the Enneagram positively affected you? And
Mm.
many people are listening. The millions that are listening. That's a faith
Oh, yes.
declaration.
That's it.
Uh,
They will, Dino. They will.
future, they're going to come back to this episode. But
That's
everyone
right.
who's listening, the great audience we have, probably a lot know about the Enneagram, but some won't. So how did you get into it? How has it
Mm.
positively affected you? And kind of a crash course, what is it?
What is it? Yeah, of course. Yeah. Well, I know that most people, if you're vegan, if you are a marathon runner, or if you're an Enneagram supporter, most people know about it. And
Yeah.
so I have, it's one of those topics
If you
that
eat
people
organic, you
often.
probably know about the Enneagram.
Yeah, exactly. So it's one of those things that when I started, it was something I would talk about a lot. And it's now become something that's become more like a scaffolding that I use and a mind map that I use. And people
Yeah.
might not know that I'm even using that as my framework of understanding the spectrum of human traits, but it's something that is so helpful in understanding the diversity of the people that we're interacting with. So, yes, as you described it, a self awareness tool. Um, and I also think like a spiritual tool as well, because a lot of it is talking about the immaterial parts of who we are. We've got a physical body, but we've also got immaterial thoughts, fears, desires. Yeah, inhibitions, all these things that are causing us to make up who we are as well. So
Yeah.
I think it's a really great map and framework for us to discuss some of these things in a really neutral language. So when I say it's spiritual, it's actually not belonging to any spirituality in general or a religion in general, but it's spiritual in that it talks about the immaterial parts of who we are, but in a really good neutral way that we can speak to all people in all different walks with it. And there's not like this barrier of perhaps religion or spirituality that is stopping that interaction. So I think it's actually a really good step in and a way in to have some really deep conversations with people really quickly and safely. So I myself have I came across this tool maybe 10 years back when a mentor of mine, a family friend, had done much study herself, and she kind of introduced it to me, and it was just one of those things when I heard it, it resonated so strongly. I just saw how it worked. I'm like, wow. And so that's when I jumped into studying it and actually using it for my own personal growth and self-development. So that's where it wasn't something I was ever intending to be teaching or training or using with other people. It was really something like, wow, that's how I am. I felt seen, I felt heard, I felt known by this map of wisdom of the spectrum of human traits, if that makes sense. So the Enneagram itself, just Ennea is the Greek word for 9, and gram points are the 9 points of personality. And so the diagram has like a circle, the circle being really representative of its equality as well, in that there's no trait or quality that's better than the other, no type that's better, but there's a real there's something to be learned from each of those types, if that makes sense. And there's a lot of inner lines that are movements as well, which actually describe where we move in health and stress. So probably one of the key things that most people don't understand about the Enneagram, when you come in, you tend to do a test, you do a Enneagram test online, and you find out what your type is, and then you spend like a lot of time just like, wow, this is me. We start to go, okay, I'm going to reinforce these traits, these behaviors, these characteristics, because like, this is me. I'm going to own it. But actually, when we realize the
buy a number 5 jersey for me, whatever number you are,
That's right. Yeah, you're like flying the flag around. It's something that we tend to own, and it's like a part of our identity now. And I think that's how a lot of the discussions actually you hear about it in pop culture at the moment is it's like, I'm an 8, take it or leave it. I'm a 1, like this is how I am. So I'm not going to change. But actually the intent of understanding what the Enneagram type is to realize that your whole personality and behaviors are actually your primary coping mechanisms to protect your basic fear from being exposed. When you realize
now
that,
you tell me.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, a lot of people that do the Enneagram that they don't get that. I actually forget that sometimes. Could keep going. That's great.
Totally, yeah. And so there's that sense of like, wow, when I realize that everything that I'm doing is actually a response to the internal and external threats that I'm perceiving, and I'm also wanting to be portrayed or seen by others in this certain way, that I'm showing up as a protective mechanism for my true essence. So we often think that, oh, I am this, I am what I'm showing and putting out to the world, but actually we are 5 layers back deeper. Who am I? Actually, I am not my behaviors. I am not my traits. I'm not my responses. When we strip all of that back, who am I? And I think that's where the hard work starts. We have to start somewhere. And so we start at the most outer shell of the layer that is the Enneagram types, so to speak. But the hard work is then going, well, why am I doing that? Why is my response acting out in this way? And that's when we actually start to let go of our type, because the tighter we cling to our type, the more unhealthy we actually are. And we actually loosen our grip on it and realize, I've got freedom to choose. I've got freedom to actually show up. So from the awareness of these automatic responses that just come like second nature, they're like a second skin of survival that we've learnt. And a lot of us have learnt this from growing up in trying to be loved, trying to get our needs met from our parents and from our friends and our social spheres. We learn these things and they're second skin. And then we actually have to unlearn them in adulthood to be like, why have I done that? There's actually a deeper root and cause that we need to question.
Man, just keep going. That's really good.
Yeah.
Honestly, I feel like I would have felt like I knew the Enneagram really well, but I honestly don't know that I actually knew that, which makes me feel really silly. But that's really good. That's I'm speechless. That's awesome.
That's so good. I'm glad. It's one of those, it's a completely different framework. And when we're approaching it this way, I think one of the things about the Enneagram that's been the most helpful is that it is so dynamic. So it not only tells me where my primary coping mechanism is, somewhere sitting on one of those types, but actually where I'm moving in stress and in health as well. So when I'm feeling relaxed, when I'm comfortable with people that I am familiar with, they're familiar with me, I'm not overly got a lot on my mind or on my plate. I'm just at ease. Wow, I can become a completely higher version of myself, and I'll move to a different direction, and I can see that side of me come out. Um, Am I still primary operating in my main type? Yes, but I have the elasticity to actually grab from another type because I'm free from the confines of my type. And in the same way, there are times where I am less of myself because I'm under stress and I actually become a shell of myself and I respond in a different way. So when your primary coping mechanism isn't working, you actually shell off to a different direction and you try something different. And that's why we can see we're not always the same. We're complex people. When I look and see the map, we actually it's something you have to learn yourself. So you start with yourself, but then once you span out, you realize, oh, that person in my life actually, I can see where their primary spot is and where they're moving to. It gives you ease and comfort because we're often asking these questions: why do people do what they do? Why would they not think the way that I think? And it gives us a lot of ease for like, actually, this makes a lot of sense. And okay, because that makes a lot of sense, I can actually give a lot more compassion. I can give a lot more understanding. And so I think that's what attracted me to it. It's such a complex but beautifully done map of the human traits. So, I mean, we can dive into something else as well if you wanted to spend time on a specific thing. But yeah, the map is incredible.
That's so good. And yeah, let's hang out here a little bit. I'm going to try to unpack a thought, and so I can get your perspective on it with what you just said.
Perfect.
Um, so I have a kind of a working theory that, and I think I kind of shared it at the beginning of the podcast. God designed each of us uniquely.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of life is about finding how we designed you, being that unique person within the framework of scripture.
Mm-hmm.
But being that the happiness is found in being the person He always designed you to be, that success is found, that if He's designed you to be a race car, then trying to be a tow truck is never going to work very well. And if He designed you
Yeah.
to be a tow truck and to pull things, trying to be a race car is going to, I think, so that's a
Yeah.
working theory that a lot of people are unhappy because they are not living out their God design.
Mm-hmm.
So I had that kind of theory. It's been building for years. Then I got the Enneagram and I thought, okay. And then I know sometimes I think different Enneagram teachers say, don't try to use the Myers-Briggs 16 personalities with Enneagram.
Mm-hmm.
Personally, I feel like there is overlap
Mm-hmm.
and even numerically, it's not such a far gap of
Mm.
variations.
Yeah.
Because the 16 and then there's variations within that or whatever. Um,
Mm-hmm.
it felt like, okay, I could see how you kind of slice the pie of possible human variations in
Yeah.
a certain amount of ways. So when I saw these systems,
Yes.
I go, these are identifying you. So
Mm-hmm.
learn them and optimize kind of inwards towards that identity point, because you'll be better for it. But what I just heard you say, and I know it's more complicated. I don't think you're totally contradicting that. But what I heard
Mm-hmm.
is that at least with the Enneagram, this isn't pointing necessarily towards you. It's pointing towards your coping mechanisms, and you are
Mm-hmm.
deeper in. What do I
Yeah.
do with that? Any thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. Um, I think that's, like I said, we have to start somewhere. And so that's usually where most of the growth and development starts and stops because we see it as strengths and weaknesses. And so I'm going to uphold these strengths and, work on these weaknesses, but we don't ask why they exist and why they're there. And so that's where you have to understand what the basic fear underlying all of that is driving these behaviors because there's something driving it. So because you're strong in something or you're weak in something, because there's something that you're trying to do innately. And that question is is connected to that basic fear. So for myself, being an Enneagram 1, my basic fear is of being imperfect, being flawed, being not above reproach, or not integrous. And so a lot of my personality driving what I do is it can show up in, okay, I want to be seen a certain way, put together, rational, well thought out. I want to plan and make sure that I don't miss a beat. And so if I am not careful, I can see all of these behaviors, which might be good. This is the thing. This is where we get it confused. We label things good and we label things bad primarily because culture tells us to value this or to value that. But reality is, my planning, if it's unhealthily driven, then it's going to over plan and over prepare to such a way that I'm constricted and I'm less of my actual who I am. Now, when I'm comfortable with who I am less tied up in needing to be something for other people or needing to be something to myself. And so I let go of that need and desire. So for example, we're doing a podcast right now, right? And the inclination for me is to go, wow, how can I make sure that every single word that leaves my tongue is articulate, has finesse, has all these things. But the reality is I could have come into this with like structured things I wanted to say in this moment, but it's not going to be actually allowing essence to come up. And what this moment requires is actually letting it. So you can see how something that could be good, planning is good, but actually can sometimes squash the actual true essence of what can emerge when we let go of that trait, if that makes sense. And I just use that because that's mine.
Yeah.
That's really good. To ask.
So, okay, teasing this out more, because I'm just trying to learn and hope people can kind of follow along with us. And if they can't, too bad, because I'm having fun. I hopefully Raquel's having fun.
We're having a great time.
I think they all will be able to. Well, I don't think there's anyone named Ronnie listening, but if there's, except Ronnie, not you, Ronnie, you idiot, you can't follow along. Just teasing. So I guess, what am I trying to say here? The Enneagram, yeah. So it's kind of actually pinned off of a negative, off of your fear, your weakness. That's how you get pegged with a number.
Mm-hmm. You don't know that until you actually look. But yes, the behavioral traits is the number, the traits that it shows up as, but underneath driving those traits is a fear. And we have a basic desire as well, a basic fear and a basic desire. And each of them have a unique one.
And I have heard that some, I think, practitioners of the Enneagram then talk about, then there are 9 layers of health.
Health, yeah, that's really helpful as well.
And I think I've kind of heard that, the more unhealthy you are, you kind of fringes, you actually start, all the wildly unhealthy all kind of look similar, and all the healthy all start to have some converging principles of similarity. Is that accurate?
Yeah, absolutely.
Like they're all humble, they're all teachable, they're all confident.
They're at the higher self of the virtue, and they will often let go of a lot of the confines of personality that we live rigid within. So we can actually elevate beyond, because the self-awareness has come forward. We're no longer driven by the impulses that are so subconscious that they're deciding for us. But when we become aware and we bring those to consciousness, actually, we can realize, wait, why did I do that? Okay, I did that because of X, Y, and Z. Next time, do I need to respond in that way? No, I can actually, or no, actually, that is the way I want to respond, and I'm choosing that now. So it's a bit of a process of, similar to like the backpack analogy we used before. It's like you bring it up, you look at it, and you go, I can make a conscious choice now to keep or discard and to do a different way.
And I think for anyone who's done the Enneagram, once you're to use it to recognize what's going on, like to functionally use it, I feel like it's complicated, but also pretty intuitive. I think you can get benefit. I think people benefit from it pretty quickly.
Yeah.
I think I'm trying to dig out something that I don't know if I've ever explored, kind of like how is the mechanisms working? Even I don't think a lot of people realize that, as far as I'm aware, the tests, which I know some practitioners are pro-test, anti-tests,
Mm.
is I think a
Mhm.
lot of those are actually using a scientific method of basically words, right? The certain words, if I'm accurate,
Mm.
that they basically say people that say these type of words, the algorithm's gonna move them over into that. They group them based on, that's what I've heard, at least
Yeah,
that actually how those tests are
those
designed.
tests work.
Have you ever heard
Yeah.
that?
Some. There's only usually one test I recommend, and that's the Don Riso Hudson like ready test, just because it's the one that's been scientifically backed and studied and researched. So it costs 12 US, but that's the one I generally use because most research has gone into that one in designing a
And is
proper
it still
mechanism.
though is it still one where it says, would you describe yourself more likely as this or as this? Like to be
Oh, and then you
excited about a
choose.
party or not excited about the party. Most tests, and I've actually heard that the way those are designed is based
Yeah,
on a psychographic of like introverts are more likely to use certain bold words, extroverts
yeah.
or introverts will use different words. Is the test written that way?
In some ways, it is. I think there's more options though than just the one or the other. They give a variety of options. So, but yes, there is that sense of diversifying, and then it's like, okay, you've chosen that path, and now it's diversifying. But the in the Enneagram, you can be an introvert or an extrovert in any type. So they
Yeah,
don't
just an
start with those
example.
kinds. Yeah, exactly. But
But like someone
yeah.
that's, yeah. So I guess what I'm getting at is, so you can identify, break people up based on a test, based on kind of presuppositions of how you're already going to group them. That if they answer, I
Mm-hmm.
mean, the algorithm is designed so that if you press A or B or C or D, it's going to mathematically, I don't think there's any way to do the test,
It's
right?
the only way. Yeah, of
It'll
course.
throw you in. And that was programmed by a human who made a decision that said, these words are answers we think
Mm-hmm.
put you into box A, B, C, or D, right? Kind
Mm-hmm.
of
Yeah.
systematizing what we would do organically. Um,
Mm.
but what I guess I'm getting at is maybe another way of asking the question is, and it's pegging it ultimate on behaviors, which ultimately then the Enneagram says it is assuming, then goes and assumes a weakness, says, okay, since you have
Mm-hmm.
these
Mm-hmm.
behaviors, you probably have this core fear.
Yeah.
And then people hear it and self-identify, then they go, yes, I do. And that's kind of
Yeah.
magic. But I guess let me ask this question. If um, in a world where people were perfect, like in heaven, will we still
Mm.
break up into nine groups of humanity?
Mm.
Because
Yeah, it's
I'm kind of
interesting.
wondering if this whole system kind of only works. I feel like and that I
Mm.
personally think, especially in a little bit, I looked at some of its
Mm.
foundings are kind of shady.
Mhm.
Uh,
Oh, the foundations
of
of it.
Enneagram.
Well, we can discuss that if we want.
Yeah, I
And
think we
we
should.
can come back to that.
The
Yeah.
little bit like me, I think Staples said, no, it's 3,000 years old. Then there's the guy from I think South America in
Yeah.
1980s, and
Picasso.
he seemed a little shady. Like if
I think I think there's definitely some people in history that you go, they've had different influences. Some of them had Christian influences, some had Sufi influences, some had all kinds of spirituality influencing in their decisions.
I think the one guy kind of claimed like he was like different, just different spirits. I think that taught him. If I'm remembering, am I getting
Look,
that right?
I've heard that on like YouTube channels. I haven't heard that in like books.
Like
So yeah, I haven't come across that
yeah,
in like in
this would have
different
been like
Gurdjieff writings.
3 years ago, Gospel Coalition, and they're
Right.
quoting him.
Yes.
So,
There's a
but
predisposition though for there's a few that don't like it based on, and actually part of my research was honestly like, can the church use the Enneagram as a postmodern
okay,
evangelism tool? I had to go to the roots because if the church can't use secular tools or other tools that are neutral, then where does that leave it? So I had to actually ask those questions at the roots, like, is it okay? Like, is like Augustine says, is all truth God's truth if
yeah,
it's used? So actually, Gurdjieff talks about, who was like early 1900s, who was very influential in the Enneagram, bringing it over to the States. Very influential. He was the one who said this is a neutral tool This is something that any spirituality can actually use and import their lens onto it and it be applied and used. So in the sense that it holds no spiritual ties, you can bring using it as a self-awareness tool using Christianity. You could use it from a Buddhist perspective. You could use it from any perspective.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's probably a whole other podcast and a good one to have. The point I was bringing, even saying that, is why I have felt like it was. I love it, but I sometimes have those doubts. So we should probably have that second podcast sometime when you're available, because I have had those doubts. The way I've reconciled them is kind of what you're getting at with universal truth is, okay, you don't just come to you could come to this without using the black arts. I'm not sure anyone's saying that the black arts were used, but like it ultimately is I think based on principles of human personality and observations of the reality of the
observation
world.
of people. Yes.
And I think that people do talk about some of the old stuff that, thinkers and spiritual, the Desert Fathers or whatever, they're trying to, I think, break up reality, even the cardinal sins, the seven sins, and the virtues, and the four virtues, whatever. They're trying to mathematically kind of break, I think, human identity down, is what it seems like.
Yeah.
So that's why I felt like, okay, if we can redeem it, if it's good, wherever we're at, it's pretty kind of universal truth. But I guess what I'm getting at is it a tool that was designed and only kind of like tracks its truth because we are broken individuals? And so, okay, cool, that's a commonality. And that's now we build out our framework, which is the state of all human beings since Adam and Eve. So it's definitely very useful. But back to the question, if we were perfect, does it work? Or now is there do we need a totally different framework? And how many perfect types of humanity are there? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Now, for anyone, so before I get burned at the stake, what I mean, like, perfect is defined by the Bible. God is perfect. No man is perfect. When we're like God, we'll be perfect. But I don't think in heaven we're all going to be personality-wise the same.
Yeah, no, I don't think the goal is even to fully lose. We cannot show up in the world without a sense of an ego. Like we will not lose that fully. We will show up in a way, but is that way, we need to ask ourselves, is that way healthy? Is that way motivated by the right motivations? Is that tied up, or is that actually constricted and restricted by something else that's driving it in fear? So
do you think how many do you think there'll be 9? Like, do the 9 broken types represent us and now when they're healed, or is it would it be a different grouping of personalities?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think we only know what we know up to this point, right? So who knows? Like, God might be like, hey guys, you missed like 3 types, or like you missed what, who knows? But the best descriptor I've come across is these 9 types and the interrelationships between them to describe. So this is what, from my understanding, the best of what we've got to understand. I think that in heaven, all of the virtues are going to be at the highest point. All of the best of gets like pushed forward, and we're no longer like perfect love casts out all fear. Like the thing that's driving the way we show up is actually been rectified. And so there is even that sense in Christian circles when we use talking about the Enneagram, is that when we when we're born have a sense of something better than what we're experiencing. We have like that like kind of shadow, that image, that memory of God in a sense, because we ache, we yearn, we struggle in this world. And part of that struggling is that sense of feeling like once we were created, when we were created in perfect love, we were united with God, and now we're separate from him. And so that fear comes from that separation of like wanting that love again, wanting that belonging, wanting that purpose to be. And that is who God is. And so that reuniting of one day when we're in heaven is like, that soul wound, that ego wound is healed. And so when we show up, it's a purified version of who we are, as opposed to losing ourselves. I don't think that's the goal. I think the goal is to purify the expression of how God's made us uniquely.
That's good. And forgive me if I'm annoying, because I try to almost break the system to understand the system. Like, okay, what if I turn it upside down and look at it this way? What do we get? it's probably way above my pay grade because God always
Probably
knew
mine too.
you. Well, it's good, and you definitely, obviously, you're the expert on this area. But
Uh,
I mean, God always knew we would sin, that mankind would be broken. He started the ball rolling of humanity. It happened.
mhm,
It obviously is worth it to him. He believes the beauty is worth all the pain, the sacrifice, leading up
mm,
his own son. So it's all, the journey is worth it. So I wonder if so to ask the question of kind of like a world without brokenness, like a story that
mm.
didn't have brokenness, is kind of a moot point because I guess he always knew his bride on the other side of this world into eternity would always be a
Mm.
redeemed bride, would always be a bride that had a scar that was healed. Um,
Yeah.
so, yeah, I think when I first came right across
Mm,
Enneagram was maybe like 2018 or something, the road back to you.
mm, mm, yeah.
And that was
Yeah.
thanks to
Susan
Suzanne
Stable.
Stabile, Ian Crone.
Mhm.
And at the time, anyways, I just felt like a nice warm blanket with your grandma, Suzanne, talking. And it just
Same.
like, you're like, man, I think I felt like I found myself a little bit.
Mm,
And because
mhm.
for me, like, I'm looking for myself. I'm looking, what's my identity? Who's God want me to be? Um,
Yeah.
and so in some sense, um, so I'm processing it because in one sense I feel like I found myself in the Enneagram, and yet what you're saying is true. I think, is that in some sense, no, I didn't find myself. I found a version of myself that needs to change.
Mhm.
I
Yes, that's
I
right.
would have preferred it was I found myself. Now that's me,
Yeah.
and I think it's
Yeah.
maybe, and so in some ways it's actually don't like what you're saying, Raquel. Can you just restart it,
So sorry.
change the
Yeah,
facts?
we can
Um,
pause this.
no,
But
no,
even
that's
that concept of the garden is like God was in that close proximity with them. They didn't even know they were naked. It's after they realize, oh, fear and shame has entered, this like brokenness has entered. They had this sudden self-awareness of like, I'm not enough. I'm not enough to be, and felt that separation. They've covered themselves, and that's how I even explain like the personality in the coping mechanisms is these coverings, is to protect and shield, of like, wow, now I need to be something else in order to be loved, in order to be valued, in order to be worthwhile, like all of the different primary desires.
yeah,
Um, and so that's what I mean when I say when we get to the other side and we're in heaven, that fear that of separation or distance from God, which is perfect love, is actually going to disperse all of um,
but
that
probably
driver.
our uniqueness will maybe come in part because if we remember it, because of the story of that redemption.
Yeah.
Do you
Yes.
think like part of what will shade our personality is, hey, I was a five trying to do all this stuff, and now I don't do that anymore because I am now fulfilled in
Mhm.
Christ, or I'm a one.
Absolutely. And also you as a five that's healthy should be able to draw on the high points of the other types as well. And to even that's where it comes into how does this help us in spiritual formation and faith, is that our goal often we form naturally by, like we said, our strengths and weaknesses. The reason why our strengths are strengths is because we spend more time developing those, and we
Yeah.
enjoy. We've got this personality preference to lean in here. So part of our spiritual formation journey is to actually to develop our underdeveloped areas.
Hmm.
And so when we're sitting in five, sometimes it's actually like, hey, I'm gonna, if you for you, Geno, it's like, what does it feel like to sit in a six, to sit in an eight, like for me to take on some of the higher virtues and the higher traits that I might have shut off. So part of the reason why you're a five is because you actually want to distance yourself from association with the other types, particularly your stress and your security. There's something about them that you're actually going, I'm going to keep you away at arm's length
And
over
what's that
here.
for a five? What's that for me?
You've got eight and you've got seven. So they're your
Okay.
two movements. So fives being very meticulous in thinking and analyzing and asking questions and going delving deep. For fives, they think seven. Why would I want to be like a seven? It's scattered and playful, joyful, all those things. Like it's not that you can't be those things, but you're kind of like, it seems a bit silly.
Silly.
Like yeah. And so you actually, even though you go there in stress, you keep it that at a distance. So it's like an elastic band. You're like pushing it away. And in the same time, part of the five's growth into health is to be an eight and to find its voice and to actually lead up as opposed to staying more within yourself or within your circle. You become more influential, speaking out and finding the voice and the outlet to use the knowledge that you've acquired as a 5. But that can be scary. But that's the higher side of the 5, moving in security, if that makes sense. When you feel more comfortable, that's come out, and clearly that's a key part of who you are.
Is that the goal? I honestly feel like I've been using the Enneagram wrong. Like, because I've always kind of thought it more like, okay, we've identified you now, be a better 5, be a better 1. But you're saying it's almost the opposite, that I am a 1 or I am a 5 or I am a 3, whatever you are. And now instead of optimizing on that or accepting that, and then now I need to be actually like move away from that to expand upon the other things. Well, maybe not atrophying in
part of it,
skills or.
Yeah, part of it is actually realizing you're not just the 5, you're actually the 7 and the 8 as well. And so you have kept them at arm's distance, but actually reclaiming some of those things. The stuff that the reason why you've kept your 7 at distance is because there's something about that triggers you, that you're like, that's not good, that's not right. There's something that, so you put that at arm's length. And then there's something about 8 that you're like, oh, that feels scary, that feels out of my comfort zone, that feels like a stretch for me, but also realizing that's you too. And so you actually draw on those 2 things and go, oh, I'm actually all of these. There's parts of me that are found here. And so once you kind of reclaim that own sense, then you have the freedom to go, okay, what even part of, you're a 5, but what part of 1 is a higher virtue that I can self-develop in, I can actually lean in, because my spiritual formation is going to lend me to work on my 5-ness. But you know what? I'm going to be neglecting something over here or something over here. And I need to actually intentionally look at that too.
Oh, that's really good. Having now admitted that I've probably used the Enneagram wrong, I've taught an Enneagram, Connect Group course, Allie and I, and
yeah, good.
And we would say it's descriptive, not prescriptive. Would that be more or less accurate? That, hey, it's telling you all these facts, but now you have to insert your morality. And after you're saying about you could do a different religions as a Christian, what parts of, so like if I was a pagan, then an 8 that just kills people might be virtuous, but as a Christian, be an 8 that's strong and a defender of the weak. And so what is virtued? What is glorified? What we think of as strengths probably is based on our morality, our filter.
That's
of.
Right.
But okay, that's very interesting. And so in that sense, because I don't want to have the weaknesses, I don't want to now add a new core fear of an 8, right? As I become the 8, I don't want to adopt let me get there. Come on, give me your baggage too.
Yeah,
I don't want to adopt the good behaviors that they learned, maybe actually because of their wounding or fear.
Yes, that's right. And so I think that's, and this is like at higher level stuff, which is why you're asking these questions. But this is something where you almost have to go and sit in the confines of the 8 and ask the questions about the 8 and go, what part of me resonates here? What part of me doesn't? Okay, and then kind of like where the 8 for a moment and be like, okay, what does this feel like? And ask the questions like, hey, what part of me is rejecting this or is scared of this? Or if I took on this, why would I be fearful of using my voice more? Why would I be fearful of speaking out? Ask that as a 5, because there's something 5 that's driving the distance between you and the 8, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And they call it what, your stress and security numbers, or what's that called?
Stress and security. Yeah. It's like health and stress.
So when you're like happy and everything is going good, you go to your security one, your health one?
Your security, yeah, which is 8, where more of the you show up more your presence will be known more, your influence, your voice will be louder. Your 8s are quite healthily, they're quite influential and use their voice for good. And other sides of the downside of that is domineering and controlling and there's shadow sides to both. And like you said, your filter also affects what lens you're wanting to apply to that, what you think is virtuous or good.
And does that happen for everybody? We're using mine as the example with, so as a 5, and so going to 8, insecurity, 7 in insecurity or stress.
And stress. Yeah.
Does it happen just if I'm happy, well, I would just naturally start behaving a bit more like an 8. And if I'm unhappy or in stress, I'll just naturally start
Mhm.
portraying some of the 7.
Yeah, that totally. So when your fiveness stops working for you is when you shunt across this way, or you go to a 7. So when that's like kind of your coping mechanism, like, oh, this is really not helping me right now, you kind of go across there. So
Yeah.
when all your resources that are known and are normal for you, you're like, okay, this isn't, let's try this. I mean, so for an example, because I know a 5 who stepped into a high level of leadership at my church a couple years back. And he all of a sudden was going to be this very public figure who previously was quite off to himself, very secluded in his own department. And he came forward. And because of the stress of that, taking on this big role, I remember the announcement was like, he made sure that everyone would stay away from him. He was like, if you need to speak to me, you need to get to my PA. You need to email me 5 times before you can talk to me, because he was scared. He was scared that of like this
Yeah.
big, like more like an 8 position, maybe, so to speak, like going to be very using his voice. People are going to be able to access me more. And that freaked him out. So he was like, I need to create walls up to get distance up so that I'm going to be safe, protected here. And in that moment, he actually became so he's a very rational man, very like measured, very like uses his words super well. I remember leaving that meeting being like, that was the most chaotic announcement I've ever heard in my life. Like
Kind
he
of
was
ditzy, kind of
all over the place, because he went to his 7 and became like overstimulated, stressed, all over the place. And so knowing he was a 5, knowing what was happening, knowing the big announcement was obviously a stressful one, or potentially a big thing to be taking on. I knew what was happening. Whereas a lot of the staff members were like freaking out, because they're like, who's this person that's now taking this like position? And I was able to use the map of the Enneagram to
Yeah.
explain, actually, you know what, he's not normally like this. This is a big thing he's taking on, and that's his response in a stressful situation.
That's a great example of how useful this is in a work environment.
Yes, that's right. So I knew that while I was watching it play out. I wasn't like announcing, hey, this is an Enneagram, but because I could pastorally have conversations with people who were like, what was that? I could say, this was that. And it's actually not the normal. We don't have to worry. Like it's going to be fine. It was just a stressful moment.
Okay, so that led to more questions.
Hmm.
That's good. So he's stressed. He's a 5. Yeah. So fellow 5, they're stressed, goes to 7. He's not going to 7. He's not consciously doing it, and it's not actually an effective coping mechanism.
No.
It is a coping mechanism.
Yeah.
It is a shove off away from the fear, but it's not very effective, right?
No. You've spiraled down in like in your own type of 5. You've kind of spiraled down, been like, that's not working, that's not working, that's not working, that's not working, this. So, and then you go across over there, and you don't go across to the higher level, you go across to the level that you're at. So you take on the unhealthy. So like 7s are not always scattered people. Like 7s can be focused, they can be visionary, they can be get things done. But because you've spiraled down lower in your own 5, you shunt across to the lower version of the 7, which can be scattered.
That's a really good point right there. Because I think that someone's like, it's like, you're worst. You're like this other number. You're like, well, now you're dissing that other number, and everyone is dissed in that way.
No.
But that's a great point. Is you're not acting like a 7. You're acting like an unhealthy 7.
That's right.
But as a stressed 5, you look like an unhealthy 7.
Mm-hmm.
Now, okay, I'm happy. He's happy. All the 5s in the world, they're happy. Why don't we stay in our 5-ness? Why do we suddenly start acting like an 8? Don't we just research more and be more intuitive and more introverted and or cerebral? Why do we suddenly, and I actually think I do this when I'm happy and confident, I suddenly become a little bit of a bro. I'm like grabbing guys and I'm shaking them and like invading personal space in an inappropriate way. But like that I usually would do, like, hey man, and then now I'm hugging them and I'm shaking them.
Yeah.
I do actually do that. So what's going on?
Yeah, and in a good way, there's a level of comfort, level of like, I can actually do this with this group of people. I feel safe with these people. So that actually is part of who you are. But and so you've just gone up to that moment. I think where we go wrong is when we think that our type has all that it needs. And that's all the best version of ourselves is just a five. Well, in reality, it's doesn't have everything. Because if you were just a five and wanted to just be cerebral, you haven't necessarily, lots of fives tend to isolate a little bit more, love their own personal space, their own inner circle. Whereas they can be some of the most brilliant people in the world, but don't have an outlet to share that brilliance with people. And you've got a podcast, so you've got an outlet, and you've got a community and people that you lead, and so you go to eight often, but it feels like you would go there for a moment and then come back because that's your safety spot. That's like your home base, if that makes sense. But you just ride that when that emerges, you're like, yeah, that's actually who you are as well. You come out of the shell, and to be you when you're feeling comfortable.
Okay.
So I would say, yeah, it's a positive thing.
Yeah, that's really good. And we'll move on because I want to get some hear about different areas where the Enneagram is helpful and all that. But that that is helpful. And now I can't remember, does anyone else go to seven in the same in or go to eight in security like a five does, or just mathematically it doesn't work that way?
No, it doesn't. People go to stress in eight from a two. So you move in one direction, and the lines only go one way from each place. So yeah, you're the only one that goes to eight in health.
And I actually become in health, do I become a healthy eight?
Yeah, you take on if you're a
Yes.
healthy five, you actually rise up to the level of health that you are at five, and you go across to the eight.
That's fascinating because I have a I have like a love-hate relationship with bros, which
Mhm.
I'm being really mean to eights, you know. Some of my best
Yeah,
friends are eights, but
yeah.
sometimes I'm like that aggression, that
Mm.
raw ability to intimidate, to force through. I'm like, I value it. I kind of almost want to leech off of it as a five.
Mm.
Sometimes I want to let them do it, but other times I'm like, that was you. There was no nuance. You just bullied
Mhm.
someone, um,
Yeah,
and
the
so
steamroller.
and I'm probably, this is maybe being egotistical, but sometimes when I then go into that, I feel like I'm a better eight than you are.
Hmm.
Because
Yeah,
maybe they're, and maybe I actually, maybe I'm not, but
yeah,
maybe I am, because if they're an unhealthy eight always, then when
yes,
I actually start grabbing guys and being a bro, but as a healthy five, I might actually be a
yes.
healthier, living out a healthier eight coping
Version
mechanism
of
than they
that.
were. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I would say that's accurate because you're nuanced in what you because you're seeing the eight objectively. Like you're from an eight, you're watching eights from a distance. When you're an eight, you're like a fish swimming in water. You can't see it all, so you
Yeah.
got no idea. But because you're watching from the outside, you're actually nuancing your expression of that when you do show up because you're like, actually, I don't like how that feels when I'm on the receiving end of that, so I'm going to not do that. Whereas when you're an eight, you're like, I don't know how that feels, how it feels to be in relationship with me. Like it's like I am who I am, and I kind of don't care. Like that's usually the eight. It's take it or leave it. But you're as a five showing up as an eight. You're not saying take me or leave it. You're like, hey, actually, I've learned some things that I'm going to shift and change to be the good expression of that.
Now, is it sevens go to five in health? Is that what that is?
Yes, yes, where they become less scattered or sevens sevens are quite visionary and big picture minded, but they struggle with sometimes the detail. They hate detail. They don't like to get into the nitty gritty of things. Whereas fives are like in the nitty gritty, like let's go deep, let's dive
Yeah.
down. Whereas sevens are like let's just do it all, like big picture, bit of here, bit of there, bit of everything, the variety. Whereas when they focus and they get healthier towards a five, they actually hone their attention in, which is a really healthy thing for them to focus, start an activity and finish an activity. Lots of sevens have a lot of things that they start and then they never finish. So
That's
that is the
fascinating.
healthy trajectory.
And I think that's my brother John, who you know, John is a
Yeah,
seven. He just got his PhD, graduated today.
amazing.
Um,
So good.
and um, and it ticks me off because and I'm learning to love it because he's this
Mhm.
frat boy who never was in a fraternity. And then he's just brilliant and focused. And he's like, I just did 14 hours straight of homework. And I'm like, I'm supposed to be the smart one. How are you
That's
handsome,
amazing.
buff, partying, and more focused than me? But as I'm learning with him, he has things he could grow, and he'd be the first to say that. But he has a really positive self-talk. So he has certain like internal things that are just very positive. And so
Mhm.
I almost hate to say it, but he must be healthy in at least certain areas because he's like
I
a
love
healthy
that.
seven and just whooping my behind as a five. And I'm great, he's
Gold.
great, but he's just like, and so that makes sense now that
Yeah.
if he's healthy, he could now suddenly. Oh,
Pinpoint. Yeah,
yeah.
that's right. At the five. That's a really great example. Mhm.
Okay, that's fascinating. We could, well, just for the audience
Mhm.
sake, we'll keep moving on. This is so good, Raquel. You doing good?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, this is
Thank you
awesome.
so
I'm just
much.
waiting for all of the family members. We'll just work through one by one. We've got you, we've got Johnny now. We'll just one by one,
Yeah,
just psychoanalyze them all. I'm kidding.
we need my wife and Allie. We need.
That's it.
So, how could this benefit someone at work? If we're taking this framework that we're talking about, we're gonna, I guess, assume that someone has kind of, even through this conversation, got a gist of how it works. Maybe read a book or two. Um, and maybe there's a book on that would help, particularly with work, but how could the Enneagram benefit us at work? And we're going to ask that in a couple of different areas of life.
Yeah, sure. Well, I think when it comes to work, this is actually the place that we're most likely to show up less in our essence and more like the way we want to be perceived. So we're going to be showing up more like the shell of ourselves because that's what we want to put forward.
Mhm.
So there's a little less authenticity, there's a little less genuineness for growth. It's like um, this is what I want to be seen as, and so it's a hard one doing like these workshops in a work environment. It's kind of because the Enneagram actually does deal with fears, with things that are actually deep. You're like,
Yeah.
this is too much for my work environment in some ways. But when
I'm not
you're
going
not
to tell
showing up
Lisa
doing the
from
work,
marketing about that.
yeah, exactly, exactly. So like, oh, that's my boss. Like, there could be repercussions if I was honest or if I was
Yeah.
open or that kind of thing. So really the most helpful way is when you understand yourself and you understand the spectrum of human traits, you're going to show up better in your workplace. You're going to give compassion where most of the time when we don't understand something, we reject it. We distance ourselves from it. And so in a work environment, whether you're a manager, whether you're you could be in HR, you could be employing people, or you could be creating teams or in volunteers, we tend to want to bring people around we like and we tend to bring people in that are like us or think the same way because we feel comfortable, but we exclude people that are not. And so this is where at work, when you in managerial roles, it's actually really helpful to know that we're looking for the diversity component of all of the types because all of the types have a gift to bring the conversation. Now if I was only filled with a team full of like visionaries that are all like go-getters and do that, no one's actually going to execute the plan. It's like we're going to like run ahead in dreamland and we're going to go power on, but who's actually doing the work
Yeah.
that's going to execute the details? Or if you are, for example, someone who is risk adverse and you're in a team full of people who are just like, yeah, let's go do this, let's try that venture and whatnot. You're like, but slow down, like we need to actually address this issue. The the people who are the visionaries in a work environment aren't as likely. They're like, why are you slowing us down, asking us these questions? Why are you bringing your skepticism or your criticisms or your questions? And it can cause friction and tension because people, according to their personality, are trying to achieve different things under the same banner of an organization.
Yeah.
Um, so I think just bringing all of this up in conversation, it helps if people in the team can you know the Enneagram as language because it becomes a shared language of understanding between one another. But at the very least, if you show up with self-knowledge and you have an understanding of other people in your team, you can give compassion and understanding. So we can get into more specifics if you'd like of details of
Yeah. Maybe
work
one
scenarios,
specific
but
question I was wondering is if I'm a boss and I know my team's numbers, they've self-identified, whatever, and like, okay, they That's their number. We're pretty sure that's
Mhm.
accurate. Um, and what I'm learning from you is that they've gotten good at things actually driven mainly by a core desire, but a core fear. It's actually didn't start from a healthy place necessarily. It came from a fear, but nonetheless, they've gotten good at this certain thing because of that. So do I take their number? Do I use their numbers and automatically essentially like put a 5 on research and an 8 on motivational public front speaking and any bill collection and a 1 on administration and compliance? Do I do I put them kind of in the
Mhm.
places based on their number, or do I need to actually not? And I just need to pick them on other positive traits and then use this in our cooperation to understand something else, a more nuanced thing.
Yeah, it's a good one. And this is probably where some of the pitfalls in using the Enneagram is that we try to box people quickly into their type,
Yeah.
and we do that. But actually, it's less important what we think they are. It's more important what they think they are.
Yeah.
And so if we're like, oh well, a 1 is just like administration and all of this, well, I'm a 1, and if someone was to do that to me, I'm like, yeah, I can do that. I enjoy that, but you're actually missing a big, large component of me that can be super visionary, and the other layers of my spiritual gifts that can come into it, or apostolic content, spirit. Like, there's layers to people that go, wow, my mind is actually bent towards visionary, more than that. So if I was boxed in, I would be like, oh. So as a manager, the work is always, you can't get off the hard work of the relational understanding and getting those people to self-disclose where they see their gifts
Mm.
are, their strengths and their weaknesses, um, and then building it around them, and positioning people around what they disclose, less around their number and their type, and more about like, hey, actually, this is my sweet spot.
Okay.
Um,
I think what I got from that is that that could be a pitfall. If you just said that, if I'm understanding you right, that if someone were just to take the numbers and go, I'm assuming I know what this means, and they're and place you that you'd be
mm,
using the wrong that's probably the wrong way to use the tool more times than
absolutely.
not. Is that accurate?
Yeah, 100%. So you definitely don't want to box people in, or just, because remember, that's not the only part of who they are. I've got a bit of 7 in me too, and I've got a bit of 4. I've got
Yeah.
things that make up a component of me. So you want people to self-disclose. Even if you might even know, you're like, oh, you're definitely more like a 7, and I think that I'm a 5 or something, something crazy. It's actually less important what you think they are. It's more important that they have the voice to express what their desires and needs are.
But even if they
Um,
say the number, that doesn't then assuming that that's all that the number will always suit a role. I guess where I was saying that's where you're
mm,
probably going to trip up is thinking
definitely.
that okay, because you're that, I knew another 3 and they were in that role. That doesn't. It's
Yeah.
not. Are you familiar with the Working Genius one
I'm
from
not sure that I
Lencioni?
am.
Oh, it's really
Oh.
good. Patrick Lencioni came out with one particularly for work, and it's
Mm,
6 personality types, and they're particularly working personality types. So this one's not for
mhm,
self personality. It's not for relationship. It's for how you work.
mm.
And I think it does the word widget. So it's
Oh,
wonder,
yeah.
invention, discernment, galvanizing, enablement, and tenacity.
Yeah.
And you have 2 geniuses, 2 competencies, and 2 frustrations.
Mhm.
And so they'll use that framework to help place people. And I'm thinking that, and so that one makes a lot of sense to place people. But you might have, I'm guessing that you would have different Enneagram numbers that would all align up
Mm.
in the different ones of those widgets. They wouldn't probably align perfectly.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah,
Um,
absolutely. I think the Enneagram, you probably, when you're looking at, especially when you're in teams, the thing that you want to look for is not having, there's certain types that are visionary, there's certain types that are detail oriented, there's certain types that lean in a different direction. So even like to understand where the cluster is in the team is really important as well. So if you're all clustered in the like 7, 8, 1, and you're all like big, like visionary, that kind of thing, and um, you're missing some people who are slowing you down, like asking those questions of risk, or questions that might actually nuance that. You need to just see where the team is placed and see like what are the strengths that are going to naturally emerge from this group, and where are we going to be having blind spots. that we need to actually intentionally graft in.
I like it. So I think what I'm taking from that is use it, but you need a little bit of nuance when you're applying it into where you're putting people, where you're locking them in on their contract for 2 years. And,
Exactly. That's
I
it.
like it. Okay, how about relationships?
Mm.
Romantic relationships, friendships.
Mhm.
How can we use the Enneagram in a healthy way to benefit our
Mm.
relationships?
Yeah, I think that this is the biggest one that I use it for all the time, and mainly because we often show ourselves more truly. Like in work, there's a layer that we show ourselves in, but with the inner circle, we get to see far more of the higher side and the lower side of our type with those close friendships because we let people in at a deeper level. And so we need to be really quite careful and recognize that when I let someone in to that level of vulnerability, they're also letting me in too. And so I need to care for that when it comes up with some compassion. I need to show up with even more compassion, if that makes sense, because
Yeah.
most people judge, like they know what they are, they know the parts that they hate about themselves, that they struggle with or they wrestle with. And the biggest thing that keeps us stuck is that we judge that part of ourselves instead of bring compassion to that. Like what is, when we see it as a wound, we actually recognize that this person's not trying to hurt me or not trying to offend me. It's actually, there's something that's wounded in them that I can have compassion for that's making them show up this way. But if I'm just stuck in thinking, well, they're just doing this and doing, like, I I need to ask questions. I need to get to the root of like what is the thing that's hurting them that's making them show up that way. So I think it just makes me less jump to conclusions
Hmm.
in relationships or assume. It makes me take a posture of asking more questions of why, and it's particularly in conflict. I think, yeah, when we understand what the basic desire of a type is as well, like probably when the conflict arises, when they're feeling like their needs are not being met or they're being overlooked or not seen or understood properly. And so when I understand what motivates that person and makes them feel seen, loved, known, special, then lack of that is actually going to cause the conflict that's coming back to me. So I use these two as leverages to understand, like, okay, they're hurt. Where's that coming from? Or they've gotten cross at me. They're angry. There's a need maybe that I'm not meeting. So instead of being like, whoa, I'm defensive because you're attacking me, actually stop, reflect on myself, and go, what is it that this argument, this thing that sprung up from them is telling me about something that I'm not giving them for what they need to
Yeah.
show up for their
That's so
desire.
good. I think the Enneagram, well, I know it really helped Allie and I, my wife Allie, Allie's relationship, that helped a lot. I think that
Mm.
understanding and give myself a little brownie points. I over the years have blown up so many, have had so many arguments where like it's semi blew up the relationship because
Mm.
I probably as a five, as just my personality, I'm keep drilling down. I keep invoking until
Explode.
they explode.
Yeah.
Um, and recently I've been learning that, and be interested on your thoughts on this. It's tied to Enneagram. I think it's also to self-awareness, to just quickly in the conversation say and assuage what I think their fears are,
Mm-hmm.
instead of like letting them wonder or saying it in ways that they could, if like it would just be like, hey, I'm not firing you, or hey, we're gonna keep meeting for the rest of this semester, or as a buddy or I'm gonna be with you every Tuesday for coffee, just like if that was their
Yes.
fear. But now let me tell you, we do have to deal with this. And I think in the past
Yes.
it would just like, well, don't worry about that right now, we just need to deal with the issue. And
Mm-hmm.
what I think I'm learning is that they've forgotten the issue, and they're just what about my fear?
Mm-hmm.
But what a
Because we show up in the symptom, usually, like what we present to someone is the symptom, and it's actually not usually the issue. The issue is like further back that they're like
Yeah.
wanting that healing from and reassurance from.
Are you going to
And
betray
this is just
me?
something,
Are you going to drain me? Are you going to whatever? Are you going to
yes.
make me break the rules as maybe a more perfectionist? It's like, no, we're not going to. Would that be a fair use of the Enneagram and kind of that principle in relationships?
Oh yeah, I think that's exactly like that. You cut to the root. I think we're so busy pruning branches sometimes, and we're like the symptoms, like we're like, oh, this is what I see, but actually there's a root that's sometimes deeper, and we need to be perceiving that quicker. And that's when we're in close relationship with people, we start to learn the nuances of the things that they actually need, and they're articulating to us. Um, so what was Ali's type again? Is it a 9 or is it
She's a 1.
a
I don't
1? Yeah,
remember.
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I can imagine in a conversation of like drilling down deeper, it would feel like you're trying to find a something that's wrong or something that's not, like it's that like kind of devil's advocate position where you feel like, well, I'm like, as a 1 myself, I would be like just looking for something that is that's going to like make me feel like I'm not perfect or I'm not good or I'm not. So it's like when you know the fear and the desire, you go, this is where the potential clash can be. So I'm going to ease up here and I actually recognize, or I'm going to do this. It's like every relationship, every friendship, every marriage has to find that synergy of understanding, and
Yeah, it's so good.
it's a challenge.
I know a phrase that we'll say at times that's super special to us is just I'm with you. And
Mm,
I think a lot of times that's what
that's
people
awesome.
need to know is like, because I think a lot of times what we find is in a fight, by the end of it, they're not with you. It's like,
Yeah.
I'm leaving the church, I'm leaving the team, we're going to
Hmm.
be awkward acquaintances at the office now, versus like, no, relationally, we're not on the table. Now the issue, let's
Yes.
talk about the issue. And I think
So good.
when you realize that, and that's what's so fascinating about the close relationships, right? Is people, when you're in a
Mm,
healthy close relationship, you often fight with them, or come into more friction with them than anyone
mm,
else. Yet it's okay
mm.
because you're secure in the
The
relationship.
closeness.
Whereas other
Yeah.
people, you almost never fight, but you're always on tenterhooks because you're like, I don't know if this bridge could handle one carload.
Yes. Yes. Absolutely. And that's usually the difference between work and like marriage or relationships that are close friendships, because work, you are at that shallow level where it feels like anything could break, or there's not that real connection. Um, And so teams that do well in work are the ones that actually learn to have conflict really well and actually get past that shallow surface, kind of like, oh, we're keeping the peace here. Actually, they move through, like norming, forming, storming, and performing is like the terms in the business world, where there's like a norm that's set in culture. There's like that you guys all work with, and then you start norming, forming, you form these like shared goals, but then you realize there's a conflict that comes up. You storm, you have to storm, but most teams stop before they get to the storming, and they actually revert back and they kind of stay shallow. But they, to become high performing teams, they actually have to move through the storming stage of conflict resolution, which you do in friendship and in marriage, and that's why it becomes more real.
No, so good.
So mm,
I love it. Did I cut you off? Is there any other thoughts on that?
no, it's awesome. Yeah.
So I want to segue because I just enjoying it and want to let everybody learn as much from you as possible, and then but
Mm,
also be thoughtful with time. So I
mm,
want to give you a shot for any final thoughts on the Enneagram, and then I would
mm,
love to just ask you questions about you. You know, for everyone listening,
mm.
Raquel's awesome, and I just think there's a lot. Just love to, yeah, just have a few questions on just kind of life leadership, and as you know,
Mm,
someone been leading at a high level and education and all those different things. So I wanted to
mm.
switch to that and give people a few minutes just to hear from you on just a general level. But
Yeah.
on the Enneagram side, any other thoughts, anything that anybody didn't ask, or a
Mm,
clarification that you'd love to make, or resources that
yeah,
you think people should go to?
sure. I think when it comes to Enneagram, and like, I guess one of the questions is like, can Christians use it? Can it, how do we use it well? I just think that what I have found it to be a really helpful tool, but anything that becomes um, paramount above scripture or above our highest authority becomes unhealthy and an idol. So it's like, I think we always need to keep this like, uh, the ego gets itself into problems that the ego can't get itself out of. Like the flesh gives birth to flesh. but the spirit gives birth to spirit. So we operating in our flesh, in our ego, in our personalities, we're not going to be able to like drive out the demons that are within us. You know, there's a sense of like demons cannot drive out demons. We need God's power, God's spirit. So it's understanding that like with the Enneagram in secular spaces, there's a lot of self-actualization conversations happening where people go like, wow, I can change and transform myself. But whereas in the Christian context, we're using this as a self-reflective tool where God actually illuminates, like using it as, wow, an understanding tool to see myself more clearly, so that we can go through that refinement process of the spirit actualization, where he actually informs the change and we cannot do it ourselves. And so I think Demarest says like any other kind of self-help programs outside of union with Christ are really going to fail ultimately, because my flesh got me here. My flesh is going to get me here again, but I need something else and greater to help inform that process. So I think just seeing this as a tool, and that's what it is. That's all it is. It's a tool. And when we see it properly in that light, we can actually interact with it and allow God to use it as well. So that would be something I would say. Lots of whenever I share about resources, I think the wisdom of the Enneagram, which is just the by Don Riso and Russ Hudson at the New York Enneagram Institute. They are the most thorough in understanding all of the different movements, all of the different levels of health. Don Riso himself was the one who came up with the levels of health after many years of study. So that's just the starting point for anyone that I would send people to. Cool. And yeah, that would be helpful.
And any other ones or any other?
Yeah, it depends for what outcome. I mean, there's Enneagram in business books, there's Enneagram in spiritual formation ones. There's all kinds. But I would start there because I think it's a good self-help one. When I say self-help, self-awareness one to help us on this journey.
Like you can start, self-education.
That's right.
Yeah, you begin the process. So cool. Well, as we segue to the next bit, just thank you for that. And I know I learned a lot, and I'm always sneaking in free counseling in the podcast. So that was great. So I get some Enneagram counseling.
That's awesome.
And I enjoyed it, and it's super thoughtful. And I think it's great. It's just great to hear from someone especially I think it's interesting to hear from someone that's really dived in deep in a topic that a lot of people they love to talk about, but have very limited information on.
So yeah.
So it's like, okay, it's nice to get a much more authoritative, and so that loved hearing that. So yeah, let me jump to just kind of questions about Raquel.
Ooh.
Yeah. We'll start pretty simple. What's your? I love morning routines. Mine's always changing, but I love morning routines. What is your current morning routine look like, or is yours always changing? And that's like wake up, bedtime, coffee, tea, workout, spiritual practices. What's it like for you?
Yeah, I'm in a really strange love-hate relationship with the morning. I love it when I do get up early, and I do that a couple of days a week and have a more specific routine. And then other nights I'm like love a good late night of journaling, reading, doing my spiritual practices at night time. I tend to be just more sharp then. But in the mornings, I do a number of like trainings. So I go to the gym at like 6 a.m., maybe 3 times a week, and do that, come back home, coffee always. I love I love it when I see the sun come up and just those quiet moments before the day starts to set myself up best. So really, I flex depending on how tired I am, but I always go to the gym, and those are the days that stay the same. So yeah, there's a routine that's kind of around the gym, and the rest kind of fleshes around that, whether I do my spiritual stuff at night or in the morning.
Okay, that's cool. And part of the reason I like asking the question is, could you see someone that I think functioning at a really high level and making a big difference for the kingdom of God? And as we're asking every different person, you hear different routines. And I think that's relieving for everyone listening to be like, okay, cool. So if you'd said the whole, I wake up at 4:30 every day, like clockwork, that'd have been awesome. And if it's like, no, it's sometime late night, early morning, and it's shifting. I was just listening to I've been getting into booktubers, so YouTubers about books.
Wow. Yeah, cool.
Yeah, it was awesome. And so this gal that's like an author, and she talked about she like saying like she basically like breaking the myth. You don't have to write every day to be a writer. Like we get these ideas. You
Mm,
have to do this, very specific way.
mm, yes.
And like you can write every day, or you could not. There's people have
Mm.
done it in a lot of ways. So um,
Yeah, I definitely follow the energy and follow what I listen to my body a lot. I listen to my energy levels and just sometimes those come and there's like spontaneous moments of, I'm awake. Like there's no point trying to force myself to sleep when there's like that spontaneous energy that comes. And yet, in the same time, if I am exhausted, I just need to listen to myself and sleep in a little bit longer and shift things out. So I approach it with a flexibility that actually serves me instead of me serving the routine, as long as those things are the rocks that stay in. That's how I kind of approach it.
I like it. So those rocks are physical health, spiritual
Mm-hmm.
health.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any nutritional things? Like, do you like any supplements or smoothies or certain meals you like to always eat? Or
I mean, I eat porridge with a banana and honey every single day. So I wouldn't say that other than the fact that I love it and
is
that's just
porridge
what I
different than
do.
oatmeal? Is porridge different than
Oh,
American oatmeal?
it might be the same. It's just kind of like the oats that have the
Oats and
milk
hot
and then they're in
water,
the
and
microwave. Yeah,
a
that's
porridge
right.
sounds cooler. I have my
Okay,
porridge.
well, my porridge, like the three little bears. Yeah, that's me. So I'm consistent with that. I'm consistent. Yeah, I'm pretty consistent with like the things that I eat, food wise. Um, yeah, but journaling and reading is something that gives me a lot of life. So I spend a lot of time doing that.
Cool. So it's not so it's
Yeah.
spiritual to health. You're journaling, you're
Mm,
reading. Um,
yeah.
okay. Hopefully, okay question to ask.
Mm,
You are so awesome. You're not married yet, right?
no, I'm not.
Now, I don't know if
Yeah.
you don't have to disclose. I don't remember. I don't know if you're in a relationship or
Yeah.
not,
I'm
but
single.
okay, you are. Okay, so
Yes.
amazing man, good income, Melbourne area. Hopefully listening.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. That's right.
what advice? What advice would you? What advice would you give to the other women or men
Mm,
that maybe you say I would love to get married if that were to happen now, but
mm,
the person's not there. It kind of takes two
yeah.
to tango, right?
The tango. Yeah.
Um, and yeah, I'm gonna continue to live. You seem to be living a very admirable and wonderful and fulfilled life. Not that there's challenges.
Mm, mhm.
So, what advice would you give on that? What's any thoughts?
Yeah. It's a good one. I think it's certainly something that I've approached in different seasons of my life differently. So, but contentment, getting back to a place of contentment and joy in God has been the only thing that keeps me go through seasons. Because the desire to be in a marriage one day is still present and has been present for a number of years. But when those things aren't coming along, you have to have, I guess, your ducks in a lot of different ponds, like where you get joy from. Because I think for me, I've spent a lot of time investing in ministry and investing in study and the people that I have around, which has been such a joy. Like I think the depths of friendship that I've been able to enjoy over the last decade, post being in a school environment, have been second to none, simply because I've been able to invest in those, and vice versa. Um, but my recommendation is something that like I've always had to bring this back to God, to just be like, check my heart space, and where am I getting my joy from in this. And um, I think I in this understanding, I've had to really understand that there's an element of free will, and then there's like the sovereignty of God when it comes to
Yeah,
this. And I've had to learn to rest in the sovereignty of God a lot more than what I'm typically like in every aspect of my life. I'm like, I see things, I'm like, I'm a go-getter, I go and do these things. But yet when I'm planted where I am, and I know that God's positioned me in the location of my house that I am, in the church that I am, I have to trust that I'm well positioned where he knows my location. And so I've had to release a lot of trust and learn to let go a lot of the things that in every other aspect of my life, I'm I'm very participatory in making things happen,
yeah,
or generating or driving or leading, that part of my life. But there's something about this area of my life that I have to just surrender.
yeah.
Um, and and be okay with trusting that God knows me, knows my location, knows all the things better than I could even drum up. So I guess, yeah, that's always been a tension. Like, how much do I participate in this? How much do I play a part or not? That's something that you cultivate the openness, you cultivate the state of your heart so you're ready and in a good, healthy place, but yet content and getting joy from the things that God has placed you in and grounded you in.
Man, thank you. I know that's obviously incredibly a personal one, and I want to let you speak into that and let people hear about it, and probably another whole podcast conversation,
Yeah,
that journey and the wisdom, and I think we're all even affected by our culture, by the age and the culture we're lived in, where guys and gals are developing differently and having different career goals and getting saved to different. It's just like I think you can't. There was actually there's a book called, I think it's called The History of Dating or Courtship, and it goes through American relationships from like early 1900s to modern day. And I think there was a headline after World War II that said, like, ladies, there are going to be, I think, whatever it was, 2 or 3 million less men than there are women. Grab your man. And actually, there was a shift from dating, or like where you'd go with a different person every time. I think that's when the class rings and the jackets and going steady. If you've seen that in like American movies, and now you're like, you're going steady, and it was this new fear of like, hey, lock in your relationship. But like there was legitimate, like lots of men died at that generation. It's like, yeah, your generation. And so I've a lot of so much respect for every single that's walking in great joy and purity and faithfulness and patience and trusting, and recognize that they're there's so many factors to what's going on, and when I think of it, I need to just be praying for all of you guys more. And
thank you. And I think if like, just to be honest, the deep joy has come from the deepest of grief at the same time. Like, I don't want to say like this has been this joy, but like joy and grief are like two sides of the one coin. And I think we often think that they're so polarized and opposites, but there's been a joy that's been found in some of the deepest of grief in this area, which would not have been accessed otherwise. And so, yeah, like you said, there's a whole other can of worms. But yeah, there's something there that I found, which I wouldn't have chosen and I wouldn't have asked for. But in this area, God has and will continue to redeem that area. That's how I would say.
Yeah, thanks for sharing on that one.
We're
going deep. Okay, final questions, unless there's any other thoughts on that.
No, that's all good. That's good.
These are kind of questions we've been asking different people as they're on the show. As a Christian, as a woman, as a pastor, what scares you most? We got real deep, real fast on all these last ones. What scares you most about the direction of society right now? And this could be like a minute answer or something. And then what gives you hope right now? What are you seeing as trends in society right now that you're like, that's alarming? And then likewise, what gives you hope?
Yeah, I think honestly, the way I see society is I don't have a lot of high expectations for society around us, if that makes sense. Like, I know that the trajectory of it is always going to go ebb and flow from like bad to a scale of worse to like, okay, the society when it's not governed. So I think what my heart, when I hear that question, is like the infiltration of society into the church, and how so often the trends of culture can actually infiltrate into the church at times, and actually cause responses which either pendulum swing it in an opposite direction, or we assimilate, sometimes wrongly. And so I've watched probably just obviously identity being a big thing for people in society, in the church, everywhere. And people looking for who they are is something that's been a core question. That's why I love the Enneagram, and I love using that as a tool for who am I. But I've found that, in a culture where people are freaking out about these things, we as the church on the inside need to be really, really giving sound advice, that sometimes, and discernment of like, counteracting where we need to, and actually embracing things when possible. So I think just especially when it comes to as a woman, as a person who's doing ministry in this time and season. I love that we're in an era, which wasn't always the case, that women are being empowered and released, and something that I think is a God-given mantle for women and men to be leading in all spaces of culture wherever they are. And so I think that is something to be protected in this season, and also advance. I think we as genders need to be really honoring of both and elevating of both. We're not independent of each other. We are co-laboring in this goal. And so I think the culture of society is moving towards demonizing men or putting men down so that women can be elevated. Whereas I think that a healthy expression of what God wants is that both get simultaneously elevated, and each one is not, I'm a strong, independent woman. I am actually, you're dependent on me, I'm dependent on you, and we actually bring out the best in each other. And so it's a totally different framework that we need to have nuanced conversations about, of what our identity looks like in church and expression of God.
I love it. We're going through Genesis 1 in a relationship class with our interns, and about identity and men and women. And I was just geeking out with them on that idea that when God made perfect humans, like he said, I want to make human. He didn't make a mono human. He said, the best thing I can give you is a male human and a female human. And it was just like that's God's best is both. And so I totally agree. It's beautiful.
So good. Love that.
And then was that the excitement side too? Was that the positive, is if we can apply that? Or
I think if I look at society in general, probably that what excites me is we're in a generation of people being very spiritually open. And so I think there's two sides of this as well. Like people are more like Gen Z are called the spiritually open generation by researchers, which is incredible. Like I think there's a window of opportunity here and commonality that we can actually leverage, because people are asking questions of, they're wanting truth, they're wanting reality, they want it to they want experiences. And so for the church, I think this is an exciting time, because people are looking, but they're looking in places often like in spiritualities that are counterfeit. And so we know the real power and we know the real truth. So I think part of the things that have been hopeful is that we've got a hungry generation that is super open. And so we need to be like not only speaking the gospel and speaking the truth with wise and persuasive words, which sometimes in the previous generation, like in modernism, that was something that was really important. We needed to articulate our answers super well so people understand. This generation is actually looking for something tangible that they can experience. And so like Paul says, but with a manifestation of the Spirit's power. So these two things of like sharing the truth and it being matched with power, it's actually going to show where they're going to tarot cards and spiritists and all those things as counterfeit. But we need to be, as the church, as like a hopeful alternative witness, if that makes sense.
That's so good. And that's cool to hear that the spiritually open generation, Gen Z.
Yeah. Barna Research calls them that. Yeah.
That's cool. Awesome. I could see that. Well, hey, we're going to wrap up. Raquel, thank you so much for chatting with me and with everyone listening today. And I believe everyone's going to walk away with benefit, just hearing about some of your life and journey and story, and what God's been doing in you and through you, and then walking us through the Enneagram and showing me very kindly and not intentionally, but that I was probably using it wrong, and I was able to learn that. Definitely benefited, awesome. And it was such a joy to be with you. And now I know you're going to go and go to work at church and minister.
Yeah, that's right.
and be busy, and I'm gonna actually go have some ice cream.
Perfect. What a way to finish your night. My day's still just starting.
Yeah, maybe later today you can have some ice cream.
That's right. So good. It's been nice to chat with you.
Thank you so much. We'll see everybody. Wow. What a great conversation with Raquel. When you're just around someone that really knows their stuff, has really studied deeply on it and is able to speak with clarity, with humility, with a kindness. I just find that so encouraging, so refreshing, and I hope that you were encouraged and refreshed as well. As we heard some of Raquel's story, perhaps you could see lessons for your own life as well. As we dived deep into the Enneagram and kind of nerded out on it, I hope as well that you're able to take some of it, to apply it, to benefit from it. And hopefully it was just interesting and mind expanding as well. With that, we will see you next time, hopefully next week, with another amazing podcast.